Good morning, everyone. We're going to be talking about our start on writing scientific papers to get you that scholarship. Again, this is completely optional, but I want you to feel like you can present yourself as best as possible to these judges for the scholarship. And so, writing a paper will allow you to go beyond what your poster shows. And your poster is supposed to be a snapshot of a paper, so what if we just expanded it to a paper instead? So let's get started and see how easy this is to actually write up now that you guys know all the things you know about your topics and all the stuff that you've done your research on. And almost all of you are almost done with your data itself. So this could be really good. We're going to have a focus of this week. I'm going to record 5 videos, one each day, Monday through Friday. This first video will look at the structure of your scientific paper and start off on the introduction, which many of you will be able to take a lot of what you did in the project proposal and just put it right in there, maybe tweaking some things along the way. Tomorrow's video will have you go over the materials and methods section, which can be separated into 2 separate sections and probably will be the most straightforward of all the different things. Again, you're just writing about what you did, not what someone should do if they want to do exactly what you did. We'll also talk about how to present the results in the results section. We'll talk about how to discuss or analyze those results. And finally, we'll talk about the conclusion section, which is probably the hardest of all of them to write. At the end, you'll want to go back and take a look at my packet that I gave you and look at that part about the abstract, because writing an abstract for a paper is absolutely no different than writing an abstract for a poster. So when you do get a chance to finish all 6 of these parts here, your abstract will be just a snippet of each little individual part. It'll be a snippet of your introduction, 1 to 2 sentences summarizing that, 1 to 2 sentences summarizing your methods, 1 to 2 sentences summarizing results, and 1 to 2 sentences summarizing discussion and conclusion. It really is just a summary of what's going on. So the abstract should end up being the easiest part that you write. Do not start at the abstract, or else you will be in a world of confusion. Okay? Now, to look at the structure of what we're doing here, I want you to imagine an hourglass. So back when you were learning a 5-paragraph essay, you imagined kind of this big introduction, then 3 separate parts, and then 1 big conclusion. It's kind of similar to that, but in this case, what we're really doing is we're taking a big idea, narrowing the focus, and then using that narrowed focus to introduce what you did. Then, in the conclusion and implication section, we're going to broaden that focus once more so that the reader knows not only what you did, but how does it apply to real life? How does it apply to the field of study that you chose? And it's no surprise that I broke it up into individual parts here. So today we're going to be focusing on the introduction. First, we're going to introduce the relevant literature that you already looked up when you did your project proposal. Then we're going to explain why your study is novel or why it's important and the implications that it has for particular parts of your field. And we will write a true hypothesis, your first ever college level hypothesis, meaning that we're not going to simply say, I think that, or I believe that, or if this happens, then this happens. Instead, we're going to really write about the underlying patterns that we should see based on your research and how it connects to other things. But we'll get to that point, promise. So that's the overall structure for this week. We'll be focusing on basically the top portion of this hourglass first, including what is known as a knowledge gap. That's one thing we definitely have to address. The introduction is going to set the tone of the paper. Essentially, you are writing to the reader to be able to inform them of what you're doing and why you're doing it. But in order to do that, you have to provide relevant background information, meaning that not everyone is going to read your paper, just like when you read all the papers that you read for your project proposal, not everyone is going to come in being an expert, knowing everything. So this is where you crazy writers get to do all the writing you want about the background information of your project. Again, you guys did a great job of this in your project proposal, so you might only have to tweak this. But specifically, I want you to tweak it in the following ways. I don't want you to parrot everything you find, meaning I don't want you to just have a complete long history. You're not a textbook, okay? This is not intro to uh, forensics. This is not intro to cellular aging. This is not intro to microbiology. This is just essential parts of your research. What do they need to know in order to understand what you did? This might end up being as short as what you have in your poster because you might have not a lot of background information that is relevant to your topic, or it might not be as pertinent as you might once thought. But if you start writing with a bunch of stuff that you had in your project proposal and just copy paste over and really start to read what you wrote back then, you might feel like, oh, this part isn't necessarily relevant anymore, or oh, I didn't get to do this part of my experiment, so maybe we won't really worry about that in my paper. It might feel like you can cut some things out here and there, so you're not just giving us a history of everything about your topic. One thing to note, you'll want to remember to include in-text citations. A good uh, rule of thumb is that for every new piece of information that you give the reader, it should be attached to some in-text citation. Every fact that you provide that you found from your research should be basically attributed to the previous research. And again, it is a good idea to do parenthetical citations, but just make sure that you don't start off by citing someone's name for it, such as according to blah blah blah, this happens. You want to be able to actually incorporate that better within your writing, not someone else's writing. In the introduction, you'll also want to clearly state the wider implications of your work, as in, why is your research important? For some of you, that would be, oh, we have a looming disaster of superbugs going about, or oh, we have hormone therapy as a rise in treatments for different kinds of cancers, but it might actually be causing it. Stuff like that. You are wanting to make sure that you know that your work is important and that your reader knows your work is important. Lastly, in the end of the first or second paragraph here, and really the paragraph structure does not matter as long as it is readable and nice to look at. You want to identify the problem that you plan to address, which is known as a knowledge gap. Where in the research is the gap of knowledge that you are filling with this research paper? Essentially, what is it that you are finding that others have not found before? So, if your research is figuring out how hormones deal with particular uh, proteins in yeast cells, well, now you have your knowledge gap there. And you want to be explicit about how you state your work is attributed to that gap because you want to be as straightforward as possible in this introduction so that when the reader goes to read the rest of your paper and sees your methods and your conclusion, your analysis, they have a basic understanding about what it is you were trying to do in the first place. Uh, it doesn't have to be explicit in the terms of this is my plan to address the knowledge gap, but it should be something that is said almost like the last sentence of the first or second paragraph of your introduction. After that, we kind of want to fill in the blanks with a hypothesis, and a hypothesis is going to be the next logical flow, as in we just introduced the knowledge gap, the role that your research has in filling this knowledge gap is the hypothesis itself. So let's say there's a knowledge gap of how individuals respond to different medications if they are diabetic. The knowledge gap is that there is no research on how individuals will respond to atorvastatin when they're type 2 diabetic. And then we have to fill in the blanks of saying we want to see this pattern when addressing diabetics with atorvastatin and state the approach of our experiment in figuring out that pattern. Finally, we're going to provide a 1 to 2 sentence overview of your experimental design, and we're going to leave specific details like 100 molar solutions and stuff like that. We're going to leave that for the methods section. So this 1 to 2 sentence overview is almost like you just giving an elevator pitch of what you did. You may also find that you should state your study organism or study site. That way you can provide justification of why you chose this particular system, as in those of us that chose to use E. coli or yeast. Why did we choose to do that? Well, because we weren't going to be able to be afforded cancer cells or breast cells or anything like that. So why did we choose to use pig stomachs? Well, that's what we had in the classroom. Of course, you want to sound a little bit more proactive about that particular thing. I chose to use pig stomachs because it was a good analog to human stomachs in the GI tract, and therefore it was a good substitute for humans' cells, stuff like that. Now, a hypothesis is not a prediction. We know that predictions are often ways that we talk about science, as in, I think this will happen, and then we give you a gold star. That's awesome. A hypothesis, however, is an attempt to explain a mechanism, an underlying a pattern that we see in the data. It's not going to be specific and state the expectations regarding those results. So I came up with an example here that hopefully makes a lot of sense. It deals with a research project that I used to do in my ornithology class back in college. There's a phenomenon where cowbirds, these little tiny birds that have giant mouths, actually take in other species of birds when they are nesting and allow them to leave offspring in their nest, almost like a parasite of the host. And they will raise those next generation birds, even though that's not theirs. And the research behind that is like, well, why in the world would they do that? Because there's no reason to, because they are using resources to take care of a generation of birds that are not theirs, and therefore evolutionary, that doesn't make sense. So a hypothesis is going to attempt to explain the mechanism of what's going on, not necessarily what we will find in our research. So in this case, a hypothesis of why do nesting cowbirds tolerate presence of a host offspring in the nest, the hypothesis would be the presence of host offspring causes parents to bring more food to the nest, meaning I'm trying to explain why it's happening, not necessarily that it happens. I'm trying to explain the pattern behind what is going on, not necessarily the data itself. The prediction, which is now what we're going to write, we're going to write about the hypothesis. The prediction is that the cowbird nestlings will grow at a faster rate in nests that contain, and my picture's in the way, contain host offspring. Meaning that this researcher predicts that the nestlings will grow at a faster rate, and therefore that's evolutionary advantageous to the cowbirds because their parents are bringing more food for the whole group, even though they're taking care of more individuals. That's great and all, but that's not what the research is going to suggest here. That is a very specific, very excuse me, very specific and very on target prediction. Whereas I want to focus on more of a big idea pattern that is in play. I guess to relate it to one of your research projects, for example, Julia's E. coli experiment, her research question is it possible to pass antibacterial genes and resistance onto another strain? And her hypothesis would be the possibility of these conjugations could allow bacteria to live on through generations even after Lysol and ethanol and all that stuff tries to kill them. That would be the pattern that we would see behind what her research shows, not necessarily that she is predicting that that will happen, but the possibility that is there. Hopefully that makes sense. Please email me if you have questions about this last statement here. You're not going to write it as hypothesis like we did with our first projects. Instead, this is going to be a flowing paper. So this is literally going to read just like another sentence in your paragraph inside your introduction. And at this point, you guys have so much work gone into your project proposal, which is essentially an introduction waiting to be started, that I feel like this would be a very good part of your paper, and you guys represented yourselves well when you did your project proposals. Okay. Email me your questions. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about methods and materials section, so stay tuned for that. Hopefully you're working on stuff this week. Let me know if I can check on your posters or on your papers as you get to writing this. Feel free to email me anytime. I'm here for you guys. All right? See you soon.